Now I've got the chair of the FTC, Lina Khan. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I want to start off with an interesting one. Can we start off with Mother Fracker? This is kind of crazy. So can you explain who he is and what the FTC is doing?
So the FTC, enforces the antitrust laws, and as part of that, we review mergers and acquisitions. There have been a whole set of really big proposed deals involving oil and gas, and as we were investigating one of them, we uncovered these text messages between the CEO of a company called Pioneer, his name is Scott Sheffield, where he was texting and having private dinners and communications with high-level OPEC officials, basically suggesting that instead of all of these producers competing, producing more so that prices come down, that instead maybe they should all work together to cut back production in ways that would make prices high. So we uncovered this as part of our investigation. We prohibited this gentleman from joining the board because we thought, this raised some serious concerns.
I mean, what does it say that you have like an American oil executive colluding with other oil producers in OPEC to, I mean, at the end of the day, just screw over American consumers with the price of gas?
That's the worry. And, there's a lot of production in the Permian Basin, and it's positioned America to not be as captive to OPEC and purely at the whims of what those countries decide. And so it was especially concerning that an American producer could have been having these communications. But I think it really, stepping back, points to a bigger issue, which is that oftentimes we're taught that the prices we see at the grocery store, at the gas pump, are just a reflection of supply and demand, right? It's just these natural outcomes that are reflecting these natural dynamics. And unfortunately, I think what we see from the FTC's perspective is that sometimes businesses are able to charge more because they have market power, because they have monopoly power, because they know that even if they raise prices, customers are going to have nowhere else to go. And so our job is to crack down on that type of illegal pricing.
Doesn't it also undermine the whole point of kind of pursuing energy independence in the U.S. so that we're not at the whim of or like foreign entities like OPEC when you have the exact same thing happening right here?
That's right. In an ideal situation, you would have American producers vigorously competing as they're supposed to be to make sure that Americans are actually paying less rather than trying to coordinate, potentially collude with high level officials in all of these other countries to actually cut back production and hike prices.
Well, this is not your beat, but it's mine to say that this is just one more reason why maybe the future shouldn't include a heavy reliance on fossil fuel companies. So switching gears a little bit here, I know the FTC might feel to a lot of people like some nebulous agency, but I want to go over some of the things that you've investigated that directly impact Americans on a daily basis. So I just want to cover a few different things. So the first is, can you speak on click to cancel?
So, as we've all probably encountered, sometimes companies make it really easy to sign up for a subscription. But then when you're looking to cancel, you have to jump through all sorts of hoops. And so they make you call customer service, but there's actually nobody there to pick up the phone. Sometimes they actually require you to send by certified mail a request. Sometimes they make you physically go to a store. And so we've seen, especially as companies have become more reliant on subscription-based revenues, companies will make it much more difficult for consumers to easily exit the subscription. We've brought some lawsuits in this vein, including one we filed recently where, consumers were complaining that every time they called, they had to call to cancel, first of all, but every time they did, they got endlessly volleyed about between these different customer service reps, and then the call would fall and they'd have to start all over.
Yeah.
So the FTC proposed a rule that would require companies to make it as easy to cancel a subscription as it is to sign up for one. So if you can, sign up through one click, you also have to be able to cancel through one click.
So that's a proposed rule, but it hasn't gone into effect.
That's right. It's a proposed rule. We got thousands of comments. Under the law, we have to review every single comment and basically make sure we are fully buttoned up in how we're proposing to do what we're doing, make sure we have all of the evidence to back it so that if we get challenged in court, we can fully defend it. So that process is underway. But I'm very hopeful that we will be able to move forward and finalize that rule in the coming months.
Okay, because I know if you need it, we've probably got a lot of people watching this right now that would be happy to lend their voice if it's needed.
Yeah, the FTC is a multi-member commission, so proposals get sent up to the commissioners, and we ultimately have to vote. But I personally am very eager to finalize this rule and make sure it could come into effect.
Okay, what about junk fees?
So junk fees, another issue that I think all too often people encounter in their day-to-day lives. You will see a company advertise one price, be it for a hotel or a rental car or an online ticket. But then when you ultimately go to check out, you see a whole variety of fees that have been tacked on to the initial price. Sometimes these things are called service fees, sometimes they're called convenience fees. Sometimes they have mysterious names and you don't actually know what you're paying for and getting out of it, but there's no way to opt out. And so we've heard a lot of concern about how these fees are, inflating prices for consumers, but also deceiving people, right? It can feel like a bait and switch. If a company's showing you one price, you then invest all of this time to see through the transaction. And then at the 11th hour, you see all of these random fees that, again, you don't really know what you're paying for, and there's no way to avoid them. The other thing is these fees, these junk fees, also punish honest businesses, right? Because if you have an honest company that's actually being upfront about what the total price is, it can lose out business to those that are doing this bait and switch. And so it hurts consumers, it hurts honest competition. We've, again, brought a bunch of lawsuits to go after illegal junk fees. We've also proposed a rule to eliminate these so companies would have to upfront show you the price that includes any of these mandatory fees. We issued one of these rules in the context of buying a car. So auto dealers can't do these junk fees. We've also proposed a rule that would be broader. We got 60,000 comments from the public, so our staff has been digesting those. And as with the click to cancel rule, I'm personally hopeful that we'll be able to move forward and be able to finalize that.
What about inhaler prices?
So we've all seen that all too often Americans end up paying way more for medicines and healthcare than feels fair. Americans on average pay more than people in other countries, even though outcomes are worse. Making sure that healthcare is affordable and that the price of healthcare is not being inflated because of illegal business practices is a top priority for me. And so our team has been scrutinizing all of the different ways that we think potentially illegal behavior could be driving up prices, including for things like asthma inhalers. Asthma inhalers have been around for decades, but prices are still high. And when our team took a closer look, we identified some of these patent listings in this obscure book called the Orange Book that we think companies had improperly included. This sounds really arcane, but the bottom line is we think pharma companies were including patent listings that blocked generic competitors from coming to the market, and that as a whole led to higher prices. The FTC challenged over 100 of these patents, including for things like asthma inhalers, where you're only supposed to be able to include a patent in the Orange Book for actual drugs, for actual drug ingredients. But what we found was that companies were also including them for things like the cap of an inhaler. So we challenged these patent listings. In response, 3 of the 4 big asthma inhaler manufacturers have announced that they're actually dropping how much Americans will have to pay, down from hundreds of dollars just to $35 out of pocket. That's already come into effect for some people, and it'll continue to come into effect in the coming months.
And did they do this to kind of like shake you off them as like kind of throwing the FTC a bone so that they'll leave them, so that y'all will leave them alone, basically?
I can't speak for them. We're still scrutinizing other areas where we think these patent listings are potentially improper, but we've also seen, senators get involved. The president has spoken up about it. And so,
Yeah.
it clearly seems like there's more scrutiny on this, and that's probably why they responded.
Okay, and one issue that's probably the most pervasive issue that we're facing right now is the cost of groceries. I know the FTC is doing something on grocery pricing right now. Can you speak on that?
So we just announced that we're going to be asking the commission to start an inquiry into looking at why are grocery prices still at the levels that we're at, right? We saw during the pandemic, costs went up sharply. And in good part, that was because of supply chain challenges. Just during the pandemic, there were all of these challenges in just moving stuff, and there was less stuff. So prices were going up. A lot of those disruptions have actually eased, but we see that prices are still elevated. We also see that profits are still pretty high at some of these grocers. And so we are trying to understand why is that. This work is just part of a broader set of efforts that the FTC has underway to make sure that companies are not able to get away with exploitative practices. So we've also just started an inquiry into this issue of surveillance pricing. So this is when companies have the ability to charge each person a different price based on just what they happen to know about you. And so you can imagine, given all of the data that companies now collect and harvest on us, and the fact that more and more transactions are done, digitally, be it through an app, be it through a website, be it through a QR code that you have to scan, that companies now have the ability to actually show each of us a person-specific price. We don't know what factors are going into that. We might not even know it's happening, but we're worried that it could be exploitative, and Americans have a right to know if it's happening. So, a hotel could charge you more for a room because they know that you've already bought airline tickets. Whereas if they
Right.
know that I'm still deciding where to go on vacation, maybe they'll show me a lower price. And so we've launched an inquiry into these pricing middlemen to figure out, is this happening? Who is it affecting? And that sort of thing.
So if they're using data that they've obviously purchased from somewhere to be able to determine how much they should charge you for something, does that mean, for example, that they can use like demographic info on you, and they can say, okay, this is where this person went to college, this is the zip code they live in, and so they might make more money than somebody else. And so if we can squeeze more money out of them by charging them more for something because we know they live in X zip code, we know that they graduated from X college, we know that they have X job, whatever it is that what we're talking about here?
That's exactly what we're looking at. We're concerned, is this happening? And it even goes beyond your zip code, right? I mean, if you wear, a heart monitor, could they be actually getting data on your heartbeat and know that when you hover over this product, your heartbeat's a bit higher, and so maybe that means you're real, just you can see where this could end
It's
up,
like a
right?
full Black Mirror episode.
Exactly. And, there's actually been research done that's looked into this preliminarily. And you would think, okay, maybe this means that people in more affluent neighborhoods would be paying more than people in low income neighborhoods. And maybe that's fair, right? Some of the research and reporting that's been done actually has shown the opposite. So a decade ago, there was this investigation into Staples.com, and these reporters found that Staples.com was showing different prices based on people's zip code, and specifically based on whether there was brick and mortar competition for Staples in that zip code. And
Wow.
practically what that meant was actually low income neighborhoods and people who lived in those neighborhoods were being shown a higher price on staples.com than people in more affluent neighborhoods that had more brick and mortar competition. So we could in fact be seeing a situation in which low income people are being charged more than high income people. So anyway, we don't know. A lot of this is a black box, and so that's why we're doing this inquiry, because I think the public deserves to know.
Okay, another major focus of the FTC is pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs. And they basically act as middlemen overseeing the cost of prescriptions for hundreds of millions of Americans. And they tout themselves as being there to save consumers money, but they're owned by the very pharmacies that they claim to save you money from. And the whole job of those pharmacies, of course, is just to make money. So clearly the PBMs are there as just yet another kind of layer of people just getting rich off the healthcare system, on the backs of sick people, which seems to me like it would be a conflict. Is there a way to prevent this kind of exploitation?
we've heard a lot of concern about just drug pricing in general and what might be contributing. We've started scrutinizing these pharmacy benefit managers, and our staff just put out an interim report with some of our preliminary findings. What we found is that over the last couple of decades, there's been an enormous amount of consolidation among pharmacy benefit managers. And so, three companies own a significant share of the market. They've also, as you suggested, vertically integrated. So these PBMs are actually combined with health insurers. They also have their own mail order pharmacies. And so that can potentially give rise to certain conflicts of interest. As our staff looked into this, they did two case studies and found that for two cancer drugs, the PBMs had actually overcharged by close to $2 billion just for two drugs, within 3 years. So we worry that there could be some significant overcharging here. That means Americans and the government are paying more than they should be. And so we're going to keep looking at that.
And is that, I mean, I guess on its face, is that legal as it stands? Is this the kind of thing where you see exploitative behavior and you're able to sue and kind of end it? Or is it the kind of thing where you see the exploitative behavior and until there's a rule preventing it from happening, so it's always kind of that we're running after these companies and patching up holes that they create?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the FTC is given authority to go after unfair methods of competition and unfair or deceptive acts or practices. Those are, pretty general concepts. And so it's up to us to determine how do those apply in all of these new contexts. So we are doing this inquiry. If we find practices that we determine violate existing law, we will be able to act. We haven't reached that point. Our staff is still doing this work. So, it's too easy to make a judgment there.
Another big focus has been Amazon and their pricing practices. Can you just briefly go over like what you're looking at with regard to Amazon right now?
So the FTC last September filed a lawsuit alleging that Amazon has violated the antitrust laws. We go through a whole set of practices, but in short, we allege that Amazon has become a monopoly and they've been able to maintain that monopoly through illegal practices. One of those practices includes basically forbidding the businesses that sell on Amazon from listing a lower price elsewhere. Simultaneously, Amazon has been hiking the fees that all of these businesses have to pay to Amazon. For some businesses, Amazon takes one out of every $2, which is a pretty, high tax effectively. We also found that Amazon uses this algorithm that has basically been elevating prices to the tune of $1 billion collectively. And so, that's part of our lawsuit as well. We think that there should be more competition here. And if Amazon wasn't acting illegally, there would be, and the public would benefit.
Okay, and finally, let's finish off with this. There has been recent reporting that some billionaire donors in the Democratic Party are seeking to have you fired as chair of the FTC. And what's crazy is that these are the same people who are actually in the process right now of being sued by the FTC. So basically, you have wealthy interests seeking to remove the very person who is in charge of regulating them. And they're using their money, their influence as a way to do that. Is something like that concerning, not just for the FTC specifically, but just that kind of abuse in general?
Yeah, at the FTC, we just kind of have our heads down, doing the work, trying to help working families and make sure they're not getting ripped off and exploited by companies. But, as you mentioned, I think a lot of Americans are generally concerned about the way that outsized economic power can be used for political ends. And that was one of the original fears of the lawmakers that passed the antitrust laws. They really thought that we needed checks on concentrated economic power, both to make sure people weren't getting bullied in our economy, but also, because they were afraid that monopoly power could be used to exercise power in government, in politics. And so that's a very core part of our tradition to be worried about that.
Well, look, I think it's absolutely insane that these Democratic donors want to use their money to be able to pick their own regulators. Like, that is egregiously anti-democratic, big D and small d, and that's, that kind of rot is exactly why we need strong enforcement, because clearly people will be perfectly content to abuse the system for their own financial benefit at every turn. And it's the very reason why the FTC is important, and why what you're doing as chair of the FTC right now, which is clearly the most aggressive antitrust enforcement that I've ever seen in my lifetime, is also so important. And I know I speak for a lot of people watching right now and saying how grateful we are for the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for taking the time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.